Hi, I'm Lindsay Lewis, editor with Building and Closure. I'm here with Elizabeth Grant, Building and Roofing Science Research Lead with GAF, to discuss their upcoming webinar, PVC, the Other White Sheet, airing on April 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Elizabeth, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks, I'm glad to be here.
So let's get started on some topics that you're going to be covering on your webinar. What's the main difference between TPO and PVC?
Well, really, it has to do with the polymer. They're two very different plastics, and they have very different properties. So TPO is inherently fungus resistant. It's also can be red list free, which is a really big benefit to TPO. PVC is a little bit different. It's got a good chemical resistance built in, and it's also got good fire resistance built in. But they're different polymers. They're both white, but PVC is the other white sheet. So you have to come to our webinar just for the title.
So what type of projects work best with PVC?
Well, I'd say to start with things that require chemical resistance. So if you have things like industry, schools, labs, anything where you might have sort of incidental chemical exposure, that can be a really helpful addition to have a PVC roof there. When we talk about PVC, and PVC is ketone ethylene ester, that's a variation on a typical PVC roof membrane. That's actually got some additional benefits. It's really resistant to grease and oils. It's also really good for jet fuel. So we have contractors and consultants tell us that in places where near airports, for example, naval bases, there's a lot of PVC key going in for that kind of resistance.
So let's talk plasticizers. What role does that play in the roof?
So plasticizers for a PVC roof in particular, what that's going to do is take PVC, which you might recognize as just kind of a tube, like a PVC pipe. That's a hard, rigid plastic, right? To make that into a sheet for roofing, you need to do something to it, and then you add the plasticizer. So in our webinar, we're going to take you down to the chemical level. We're going to show you at the molecular level how that works. But the basic premise is that you add another substance to make that more pliable, to make it into roofing. So the difference between a PVC and a PVC key is in the kind of plasticizer. PVC is liquid, and PVC key is a solid plasticizer. And we'll get into more detail about that.
So I know you're going to talk more in depth on this in the webinar too, but how does PVC support sustainability?
There's a lot of ways. I think the thing to remember about PVC is it's a very valuable polymer, so we want to try to reuse it as often, as many times as we can, right? So there's really a couple of ways to do that. There's a closed loop and then there's open loop. So closed loop is when you take the membrane itself and you take off the fleece, if there is a fleece back, you take out the scrim, and you can reuse that polymer and make the same product over again. So that's a closed loop type of recycling. And we tend to look at that for mechanically attached roofs because it's easier. You can just cut around the fasteners and use the sheet, roll it up, and send it to a distribution facility, to a recycling plant. Now, there's a lot of really cool things you can do with it with an open loop recycling, and that's when you take a material and use it for something else. So, for example, PVC roofing is being used as flooring, and I think that's pretty neat because you can take the scrim and the fleece back, and that's actually okay to be ground up with the polymer, because that's actually good for a vinyl floor. So you can turn it into something else. We can also use floor mats, garden hoses, a lot of other uses. In the past, it was used as an asphalt patch as well. So there's a couple of different ways that that can also be helpful. Owners are always looking for ESG, being able to meet ESG targets. So consultants can help meet those ESG targets by using material that can be recycled, like PVC. And I think it just also increases the value of the project if it is meeting something like a LEED accreditation or LEED certification for that building.
So what else can our attendees learn during the webinar?
Well, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take you on a deep dive into the chemistry of these different plasticizers and how these membranes work, in particular PVC and PVC key. And we're also going to tell you how the sausage is made. So you may not know how a membrane goes together. We'll talk about how it's actually manufactured in the plant. And then I think most interesting for architects, consultants, project owners is the different kinds of case studies that we've looked at where PVC was really helpful in increasing the longevity of the project.
Well, thank you again, Elizabeth, for sitting with us.
Thanks.
To register for this free webinar, visit continueducation.bmpmedia.com.